we're ready when you are.
I'm ready.
I don't have a clacker, so.
That's okay.
It's funny, like the last two interviews I did, the models really enjoyed clapping along for some reason.
Let's do it.
Well, welcome to another episode of Meet the Model. I'm here with someone new for me as far as shooting for the first time. We'll do introductions here in a second, but we're doing an entire series of chatting with folks that are other creatives, but on the other side of the camera lens. And I'm very excited about the interview that we have today. I think you're going to get a lot of different perspective and a lot of tips and ideas and perspective today. So as always, I'm looking forward to another great chat. So why don't we start off with introductions? Again, Scott Dietz.
I'm Sandahl Taylor. Nice to meet everyone.
And just tell us a little bit about yourself, just to get started.
So I have been modeling ever since I was young. I started modeling actually at the age of 3. I was doing Sears catalogs, if anybody remembers what those are.
What are catalogs? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I was more into print for a long time. And then when I got older, I started doing fashion. I never did fashion until I was about 18, 19 years old. So I started doing fashion and runways, and I actually ended up training models for runways.
Oh, wow.
Becoming a runway coordinator, and then I kind of took a little break from modeling, got into pageants. So they kind of combine a little bit, and then now I'm back.
Great. Well, we'll talk more about pageants here in a minute, but so what was it when you started modeling at such a young age? Was that something that you were just interested in even as a young child, or was that something that your parents kind of like nudged you into, or?
So growing up, my dad was like a hobby photographer, so I always got to like watch him take photos and kind of do it like that. And I really just liked watching what he did, and I was like watching the girls or the subjects that he was like doing the photographs off, and I was like, I could do that.
And so tell me how did because Sears, I mean, at least at the time, that's a pretty iconic brand and kind of a big deal, you know? Right. So how did that come about?
So we were working with Sears in their actual photography department. So I ended up becoming like a stock icon photo, if that's what you want to call it. So when you would go into the Sears Portrait studio, you would see a little photo of like a couple different children. So I was younger at the time, and then there was like our stock parents, and that ended up being put into the photo. So that was pretty cool. And I did a few different wardrobes, so like a few different clothing. But that was really it. Yeah.
So was that kind of a consistent then, staying involved in modeling ever since that time, or was there like laws and
there was definitely ebbs and flows. So I did that when I was younger, and then I really had no interest in modeling as like a teen or anything like that. I was totally a tomboy. I still feel like somewhat I am. And then,
in a fancy dress though.
In a fancy dress right now, right. But I'm kind of, moving and growing. So I always say, what you see behind the lens isn't always what you see in person. At the end of the day, you see a beautiful image with, someone who is putting their all in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, that's not always everything about that person. Right. So yeah, it's a little bit different now.
That's why I'm kind of excited about these kind of conversations, because you can kind of peel back that onion a little bit, but also get to know the actual people versus just seeing the still images. Or again, there's so much editing that's there and so much, I don't want to say fakeness, but depending on how you portray it and how you go about it. But I've had a few instances where I've met a model in person and I'm like, right, is that the same person?
Is that the same person? Yeah. That's important to me. It's hard because as a model, you're supposed to be like a chameleon, right? So you're supposed to be able to change into whatever either the photographer wants or the designer wants, or, whatever the image is supposed to portray. So I love that capability of having a, look that I can change. But at the same time, when I'm doing images for myself, I want them to look like myself in everyday life. I don't want to look too over edited or too over processed, because I think that's really important for us right now as a generation, for the next generation and even moving forward. So I think that's really important for me to pass down, because I think there's a lot of images that are very over edited, And I think that that's really hard on young women, or even young men, or even people that are just now getting into modeling, to see that.
It's interesting too to see. I mean, like everything in life, there's things swing from one extreme to another.
Right.
And we've seen like over edited and like every like zooming into the pixel, and like every flaw. And one photo takes hours and hours and hours of editing time. And now we're even seeing like major brands that are now saying like the more natural look, or any of the content in our magazines will be no editing done at all, even on cover photos for some publications and stuff.
Right. And I think that that's a huge push, is that these corporations are finally realizing that there is some damage, in my opinion, that can be done from over editing. And I understand that there's a place and there's a time for it. But I think what we need to see in mainstream media is natural subjects, and, of course, a touch here or there, but nothing that is so extreme that it's not for that intended purposes. I think if you're doing something that is supposed to be touched up and supposed to look extreme, then that's fine. But I think for everyday life, like kind of what we're shooting today, it's more or less, this is the model, this is what they look like every single day, and I'm just here making the actual photo look good, as opposed to like going in and, like you said, pulling it into that pixel and touching up that individual pixel.
Well, since we haven't shot yet, we're about to do that after we get done with this interview. I'm very excited to hear that that's the approach we're taking today, because that means it's going to save me hours on the back end of editing time. So I'm very excited about that. But I'm not really big on editing anyway. It's one of those things that's just not fun for me personally. I like this side of it, the creative ideation and figuring out how we utilize this space and use it to its maximum, and that kind of stuff. So
me too. That was my favorite part. So when you were sending me the images, looking through it, and I was like, okay, I have like ideas, but then you don't really know what it looks like until you get into that space. And as a model, I think you see things a little bit differently. So that's why coming into this space with you and like hearing your thoughts or your ideas, and you're like, well, I can't really get into there, and I can't do, you can't do some things, which is really interesting to hear on how, we might have all these ideas, but there are technical aspects that we don't think about, that you're like, well, we have to make sure we're watching this and this. So that's cool for me to start learning, because I think it helps me kind of judge this space a little bit better.
Yeah. And I think it's also one of the things where I've seen some models transition into then being on the other side of the camera and turning into photographers. And they know this side, they know how to interact, they know what to expect, they know how they want to be treated. But then on the flip side, once they learn the technical side of that side of the camera, again, they've got all that perspective they're bringing into the mix, which I think is great.
You don't have to worry about me. I have
no competition there anytime soon.
As of right now, I have no intention of being on the other side of the camera. I think that
never say never.
Always, yeah. That's why I said as of right now. You never know in the future, but as of right now, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And in what I do for my everyday profession is I'm a cosmetologist by trade. So I like making the people presentable for the camera, so to speak, or, doing that part. Yeah, as of right now, I have no interest in learning the other side of the camera. So for right now, I think you're good. I think you're good.
When I first started doing photography with models, I would actually hire hair and makeup artists, because I thought that's what you were supposed to or had to do on every shoot. And being a guy, I had no idea, and single at the time, maybe that played into it too, I'm not sure. I had no idea how long makeup took.
Right.
And I just remember the first time it was like, we're an hour and a half into the shoot time. We hadn't even gotten the model out of the chair yet.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, come on, let's speed it up.
Right. And I think that that's such a great thing to offer. As a model, I have learned how to do my own hair and makeup, but it's always nice to have that being offered, especially, like I said, for a higher end image type of a shoot.
Sure.
So I think that was really great of you. It sucks that the hair and makeup person didn't tell you how long it was going to take, because typically if I'm scheduling someone, I'll say to the photographer, hey, like, I'd like to get my hair and makeup done. It's easiest if we meet at the space. If our shoot time is 8 o'clock, do you mind if we come at this time? We'll stay out of your way and I'll get my hair and makeup done. Or I adjust the time for myself if I know I need to be there, like today at
Yeah.
8 a.m., you know, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning making sure I was ready. So, or I would go to that hair and makeup artist beforehand. But I think that's another thing for, you know, models to be aware of is that, you know, hair and makeup isn't always provided. So I think learning
Yep.
how to do it to an extent for yourself is great. I also think that's important for photographers to know. Hair and makeup's not cheap
Right.
for a photo shoot.
Especially someone that's good and knows what they're doing and
Right.
has clean brushes and all that kind of good stuff. You just don't want anybody doing
Right.
it.
And it's key that you're working with a licensed hair and makeup artist. So making sure that they're actually licensed in their state is so important. As a cosmetology instructor, you know, I have seen so many people that are unlicensed doing work, and that's okay. But really, when you are working with somebody who's licensed, they're trained in the things that you mentioned, the hygienic issues of making sure their makeup is clean. They're trained in the issues of making sure their sanitation is up to par. And I've seen some great makeup artists who aren't trained naturally, and they still have that. But I always support my trade. Someone's going to tell you, make sure your makeup artist is licensed in your state if they have a requirement for that, which our state does.
This wasn't even on our list of questions, but I think this is great because it's, again, as you have these conversations, you kind of unravel some of this stuff that are like, oh, I didn't have that on my list, but it's a great conversation because it's an integral part, especially when you start getting into commercial work and, you know,
Right.
magazines and publication and
Right.
probably runway, et cetera.
Right.
You're going to tend to have more hair and makeup provided in those kind of scenarios versus a hobbyist, you know. So
Correct. And I think also two different photo shoots, they're going to require you to work with a specific makeup artist as well. So I think that that's important to know when you're working with like catalogs or even movies. Most of those times that they're in a union, so that you aren't allowed to work with a makeup artist that's not outside of that
Makes sense.
that practice.